I'm Hans-Georg Moeller. I teach philosophy at the University of Macau. Phi, who's producing this video, was asking me to talk about this video here on which I found on YouTube, Beginner's Guide to Kant's Metaphysics and Epistemology, by this channel Philosophy Tube. Phi was asking me to talk about it because I talked about it in my class. I'm teaching a class on Kant. I'm teaching Kant, by the way. I'm not an actual researcher on Kant. I'm not a specialist on Kant, but I've been teaching Kant for many years. I was looking for some materials to use in my class, and then this seems to be one of the most popular videos on Kant, one of the most watched ones. It actually has nearly 200,000 views. And I was quite surprised, because it's only a 5-minute video, how many substantial, glaring mistakes are in the video. And that's why we're producing this, in order to show how this video is problematic. Also, maybe as an example for generally how such short introductory videos can be problematic. That is not to say that all of them are problematic. I think there are also many good short introductory videos out there on the web. And there may be also good short introductory videos by Philosophy Tube. I'm not implying that what I'm saying is relevant for all videos out there, and also not for all videos by Philosophy Tube. But this one in particular has specific problems, and I'm going to address 3 of those.
So what Kant realized was that some concepts like space, he also included number and time, must be built into us from the beginning. Our brains must be hardwired to experience the world in that way.
So there are 2 major problems with what he just said. The first one is that he said that Kant is saying that time and space are hardwired into our brains. Now, he might be using this as a metaphor. It's not very clear if he's using it as a metaphor or not. But even if he uses it as a metaphor, it would be an extremely misleading metaphor. What Kant is doing in the critique of pure reason is a critique of pure reason. This means an analysis, a philosophical analysis of reason, and of pure reason means reason as it is prior to experience. Now, reason, Kant is an idealist. Reason is basically, you can call it consciousness. And consciousness is, by definition, different from material things that appear to us or that we perceive in experience. And the brain is a phenomenon in that sense. It's something that we, through, for instance, scientific, but also through other methods, can experience as a phenomenon. So Kant makes a fundamental difference between such things as brains and consciousness. So it is crucial not to conflate brains with consciousness, or rather brains with reason. But this is exactly what he's doing here. And by the way, I'm not saying Kant is right or wrong. There are many, particularly, I understand the guy has probably British background from his accent. And in Anglo-American philosophy, or Anglo-American science as well, it is quite common to reduce mental phenomena, consciousness phenomena, to brain phenomena, physiological phenomena, to explain consciousness in terms of physiological or brain events. And again, precisely this is not what Kant is doing. Kant is explicitly dealing with reason as something that is not grounded or founded in physiology. So to conflate these 2 things and to say that time and space are hardwired into our brains, it basically is a very profound, misleading statement about Kant, and it's therefore not at all helpful within an introductory video about Kant. So this is the first thing that's problematic about these 10 seconds that we just watched. But there's a second thing that is equally problematic, because he speaks throughout this video, also in these 10 seconds, about time and space as concepts. Now, for Kant, strictly speaking, time and space are precisely not concepts. Time and space are forms of intuition, as opposed to concepts of understanding. So the basic approach of Kant is that reason operates through the combination of two components. Number one, intuition, which is basically sense perception, and number two, understanding, which is basically what we could call a kind of a rational processing, a rational interpretation of the data that are given through sense perception. So these two things come together. So the understanding in interpreting basically the sense data use concepts. They have the capacity to develop concepts and then apply concepts such as, for instance, causality or substance, and Kant then sets up a whole table of these concepts. But at the same time, these concepts are applied to the analysis of, let's say, the data that perception, or as he calls it, intuition provides to us. Now, intuition does not operate with concepts because concepts belong to the understanding. Intuition or sense perception operates on the basis of these two forms with which it operates, and these two forms of intuition are time and space. That's another fundamental conceptual distinction that is basic to Kant's philosophy, that time and space are specifically not concepts, but forms of intuition. So again, this is a highly misleading use of vocabulary here that again does not help to understand Kant, but actually obstructs an adequate understanding of Kant. Okay.
Transcendental argument. Now, Kant loves to throw around the word transcendental, but don't be scared of it. A transcendental argument is when we say, okay, we do things like this, so whatever the background conditions are that are necessary for us to do those things, those conditions must be true. Transcendent, in this case, just means going beyond what we have in front of us.
Here he again makes a mistake, a fundamental mistake, that I think is informed by a common practice in English-speaking philosophy, namely that they use the words transcendent and transcendental synonymously. Even professional philosophers do this in English. Now, you should never do that when it gets to Kant, because for Kant, the distinction between transcendent and transcendental is crucial. Actually, he calls his philosophy transcendental idealism for a very specific reason, namely that it is no longer primarily concerned with transcendent claims, but with a transcendental analysis. So the distinction between transcendental and transcendent is crucial for Kant. But here too, he speaks in the video in the beginning about transcendental, but then explains the meaning of the word transcendent without the AL at the end, as if the explanation of transcendent would explain Kant's usage of transcendental. But it's the contrary is true. Kant intentionally uses transcendental in contradistinction of transcendent. Now, transcendent means, he explains this correctly, going beyond experience, something that cannot be experienced because it's beyond the scope of experience. Now, transcendental means something very different, namely basically the conditions of the possibility of having experience in the first place. And so this distinction is again fundamental for Kant, and his sloppy use of language here basically shows that he is not aware of the distinction between transcendent and transcendental in Kant's philosophy. But as I said, this distinction is very fundamental. So that's the second mistake. Now a third and final short passage at the end.
Have synthetic a priori concepts.
So he asks, what do you think? Do human beings have synthetic a priori concepts? Thereby, he seems to be implying that that's what Kant says, that humans have synthetic a priori concepts. Now again, this is a very misleading way of putting it for two reasons. Number one, humans do not really have anything synthetic a priori. It's the task of philosophy, the primary task of philosophy for Kant, to make synthetic a priori judgments. And that's very difficult because we don't have them. We need philosophy to construct them, to make them, to produce them. That is what philosophy consists in, the generation of synthetic a priori judgments. So it's not something that we already have, because if we would already have it, then we wouldn't need Kant and we wouldn't need philosophy. That's also something very crucial for Kant, because it concerns basically Kant's definition of what he did. Generation of synthetic a priori judgment. So this leads to the second problem. Again, he's using the word concepts here, where he should, implying that Kant is talking about synthetic a priori concept, but Kant is not talking about synthetic a priori concepts, he's talking about synthetic a priori judgments. Judgments combine concepts, there are concepts involved in judgment, but the whole point, if something is synthetic, it cannot be just a simple concept. It's judgments that are synthetic because they basically go beyond the mere analysis. They're not merely analytical. Analytical judgments are based on the analysis of a concept. But Kant's whole point is to move beyond merely analytic knowledge and to move on to synthetic knowledge. And synthetic knowledge is based on judgments, not on concepts. So there are again like two fundamental mistakes in this very short statement at the end. So it's just a 5-minute video, and we already found like 3 passages which include at least 4 fundamental, if not falsehoods, then at least very problematic statements that are prone to produce misunderstandings rather than basic understanding of Kant. 3 major problems that this video shows. Number one, that it is somehow, creating fake news about philosophy, right? The second, more general problem, which I think this video represents, that often, not always, but often in videos like this one, there a lot of efforts just goes into the building of the profile of the presenter. And the presenter is very much at the center of the presentation. It's like whatever in a cooking show or so, when you have like a celebrity cook, and it's all about basically building up the celebrity status of the TV cook. And here something similar, I think, happens. A lot of effort in the production goes to make this host, basically, or to form an attractive profile of the host. But this is at the expense of actually doing even basic research on the contents of the video. So there's a huge disparity of effort. And it looks to me like, at least in this video, that either the presenter or his team did not do any serious research on Kant and probably never really read his works. So this disparity is something that I think viewers should be aware of. The efforts of products like this are not primarily on the contents, but on the profiling and the commercialization of the presenter. And the third point, you introduced the books by, or at least one book by Sam Harris to me, and The Moral Landscape. And though we made another video where I'm kind of, critically talking about it, there's a lot of stuff I learned also from the book. And I in particular liked one phrase that he's using there to criticize actually religion. Namely, he speaks of an ugly marriage of confidence and ignorance. So, and I think that's a very good observation. Again, he uses this with respect to religion, right? In religion, you get, very enthusiastic about your beliefs, so you gain a lot of confidence. At the same time, if you're operating in a religious way of thinking, then this also leads to a lot of ignorance because you don't follow whatever, for instance, contemporary science or so, right? So that's why I think this expression is very apt. This kind of ugly marriage of confidence and ignorance, and I think a similar danger we can not always, but often observe in the production of videos like this one. Namely that something is presented with a very strong confidence, right? A kind of mansplaining, right? As if the person would know, everything, and as if this was all somehow set in stone. Whereas if you study something like Kant, for instance, academically, you will find that Kant often contradicts himself. What he says in the earlier writings might not be the same as he said in the later writings. And then there are many different interpretations. Basically, everyone who studies Kant comes to slightly or sometimes also very drastic differences in what Kant actually says. There is not just one truth about Kant. And the more you study Kant, the more you actually know about Kant, your confidence will be reduced, just as in natural sciences, right? This is just one way of interpreting the data, and there are others who interpret the data in a different way. In this video, there is this overconfidence in presenting what Kant is all about. And kind of paradoxically, this overconfidence shows that the guy is actually not a serious academic. Because if he would have serious knowledge, if he wouldn't be so ignorant, he wouldn't be so confident in his statements about Kant. You should be aware this is ultimately done for commercial purposes, and you are being sold a product. That's not really how philosophy should be done, right? At least I think. Philosophy shouldn't be commodified in that way. And in this way, this is a form of the commodification of philosophy. And that should you make viewers suspicious of it. That on its own is already a strong reason to be suspicious in general of this format of the presentation. Now, this being said, that doesn't mean that these kind of videos cannot be helpful. I think they can be helpful, and they are helpful, and I sometimes watch them as well as a professional philosopher. And I sometimes also use them for my classes, and I don't think, and I definitely do not want to say all these videos are bad, and I don't even want to say all videos by Philosophy Tube are bad. There may be much better ones. So the general advice is just to be suspicious, but also not to be overly suspicious. That's like basically the same like with with respect to everything, that's basically the same. Don't replace reading of the actual texts and studying any of these philosophers seriously with watching those videos, right? It can be helpful and interesting. It can help people, to get access to philosophy. But if you remain on this level, then there's a clear and present danger that you will not only be misinformed, but that you will also miss out on what's like really interesting about philosophy. So the general recommendation, second general recommendation, in addition to taking this with a grain of salt and being aware that it's a commercial product that's being sold to you, the second recommendation is if you develop a real interest out of this, then it's very much worth to go the step further and to actually read the text and learn more about it and not remain on this level.